questions that y'all have. We don't by any means know everything about this at all. We've been to a conference, so hopefully we'll be able to help get y'all answer any questions. I know this is something that some teachers here have already done. I know Chad did something with, I think, ocean plastics. I know that Jeff's in the middle of his big cookie thing right now, and then he's got Shark Tank coming up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're just here to answer questions. So the first thing we wanted to do is start off with a short video kind of explaining what project-based learning isn't.
Honey, what are you doing? We gotta go?
It's dressed like a President Day. I'm supposed to be Martin Van Buren.
Who?
Martin Van Buren.
Google Martin Van Buren.
All right, so when you think about project-based learning, like that's usually what comes to mind is like the project and having like fun, exciting projects for your kids to do. My kids too, so I haven't really had to do that yet. But like, remember a lot of my education being like, "Hey, mom, I got to make, a diorama of Sacagawea and Lewis and Clark tomorrow." And so yeah. What we're going to start off with though is we want to take 5 minutes, have y'all get up. You can see there's stickies around the room. Break up however y'all want. Answer the question, what do you want? What do we want an ECS graduate to look like? When they graduate out of here after anywhere from 1 to 13 years, 14 years here, what should they look like? So y'all can go ahead and break it up. I went to this conference and realized like I'd been doing everything wrong. And so I got back and was like, okay guys, like we're just gonna scrap that entire thing we've been working on for a quarter because it's not working. The reason is because I didn't have a driving question. And the driving question is pretty simple. It's the heart of the project. It can be really specific or it can be really broad. So what do we want an ECS graduate to look like is a great driving question. You could form a project around it. And if you look around, we've got, I know, critical thinking on all 4, I think, or 3 of the 4. We've got community contributors over there. We've got something similar over here. Like a lot of the ideas are the same. When you start a project, you're going to start it with an entry event. And that could be, it's just something to get people excited, get the kids excited about your question. This works. This was a perfect, like an easy example of an entry event. Get them up, get them talking, get them thinking about the question you're going to try and answer. The point of the driving question is to engage them and let them know that there is something real that they're going to try and learn and you're going to try and teach them about. Where's Chad? What's back there?
Yeah, comments.
He last year did a thing on microplastics and plastic trash in the ocean while his students were learning about the ocean. And so his question was, how do we fix the problem with plastic pollution in the ocean? And so they did this whole thing where they decided that they were going to recommend that the cafeteria use no plastic products at all, which we figured out pretty quickly is not feasible. So instead, they ended up deciding to ask Mr. Brady to put a water filler water fountain in the middle school, so that it could cut down on the use of plastic bottles by students. The question that drove them is, what do you do with plastic pollution in the ocean? That was what Chad built his project around. So first thing you got to do is you got to figure out what question you're going to try and answer with your students.
Cool. Again, like you said, when we're talking about project-based learning, the funny thing is this is something that we as educators actually do on a regular basis. When you are coming up with your lessons for class, you do this very thing. You ask yourself, what do I want my students to know? It's usually a question that's centered around. You begin to formulate your classwork or your week's work so that they will be able to hit this point at the end. Same thing you're doing here. The second part of this, and this I feel like is a huge thing that I had to shift my mindset around, is called sustained inquiry. So I think many of us are familiar with casting the idea of the project, the kids get all excited, and then you spend the next 2 weeks constantly just saying, work on your projects. Are you working on your project? How's your work on your project going? Your project's almost done? Cool. And then when due date comes, you're like, you clearly did this last night. Wonderful. The big reason is because we as educators need to make sure we're doing a good job of putting the cognitive load or the thinking on students, and sustained inquiry is where that happens. By definition of this step, it's students engage in rigorous extended process of asking questions, finding resources, and applying those resources, applying those questions. This is what so many of these posters are talking about. Intrinsically motivated, critical thinkers. These are things we want our students to be, but often we as educators don't put that on them. We do the thinking, and then we just kind of ask them to regurgitate the answers. And so instead, this stage of project-based learning says, what if I started thinking of questions my kids should be asking and put that on them? So if I say our driving question is, next quarter I'm going to be doing a project with 8th grade, our driving question is, what role should students have to make ECS more effective? And so whether that's student government, whether that's roles within the classroom. And so then I'm going to be staging out different questions to pose to them as they're working on their projects, like why is this role more effective than this role? Could this role be accomplished in a different way? Things that we as adults think through when we're solving problems, but we need to do a better job actually putting on our kids throughout this process. Because this is what gets them to think and work through a concept rather than just coming up at the end with an arts and craft and presenting it. After sustained inquiry, your project needs to have authenticity.
So authenticity is pretty simple. If your kids don't buy into a project, they're not going to want to do it. You need to make it feel authentic to them. That could present in a couple of ways. A big thing with project-based learning is community involvement. Authenticity, that falls under authenticity. Getting people from the community involved, getting your students involved in the community. Also, making sure that it is something that they can see like a creation, something that they can see themselves building something, being a part of. It needs to feel to them like it's something that they've made. And that kind of builds off of the sustained inquiry. I know I'm going to put Jeff on the spot. He came to me yesterday and he said, I've got this big Shark Tank thing that I'm doing. My students are going to create business plans, and they loved it. They watched an episode of Shark Tank to begin with, they were all excited about it. He says, but I know they're going to wait till the last minute and do their business plan. I know they are because he knows the kids in his class. And so we talked about, we walked through and talked about what could he do because he doesn't want to give the entire quarter to the Shark Tank plan. We've got other stuff to do. In an AP class, I have stuff I have to cover, so I'm not going to give the entire semester to it. And so we set up kind of milestones for them to hit, so that he knows they're working on it as they go. But it's an authentic project to his kids. They're super excited about the Shark Tank project, and a lot of the kids in that class typically are kids who don't get real excited about school. And so but since it felt authentic to them, since it felt like something that they were in charge of, they were leading, since they could go to their parents or business owners, business leaders that they know in the community and talk to them, it's authentic. The next step is student voice and choice.
Kyle, I'm with you on the spot. Do you mind reading the definition of student voice and choice for me? See that okay?
Definition: the project allows students to make their voices heard and to make choices about what they investigate, the products they create, and how they work, and use time guided by the teacher as appropriate.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stewart. This is one aspect of project-based learning, or just about projects in general, that can either make it really rich or can kind of derail it. So I think often we want our students to be able to make choices, we want them to be able to make decisions, and then sometimes when they do, and they're grouped up with their friends, and they're not accomplishing anything, and you're looking back going, why did I ever let you choose that at all? There's actually a way for us to offer choice to our students while still maintaining that control. Andy and I both have 2-year-olds that are actually close to the same age. And so one thing that we've learned is when you are getting your kid dressed in the morning, I know there are veteran parents in here that are like, you should have known this already. When you're getting your kid dressed in the morning, what you can't say is, what do you want to wear? Because my son will walk out of the house looking like Gecko every morning. That's just how it's going to be. What I do instead is I place 2 outfits and I say, which one of these do you want? And if he's not going to make a choice, then I say, well, then Dad's choosing and you're wearing this one. I'm offering him a choice, but I'm controlling the outcome. And we can do that same thing with our students. Whether that is what part of the project they're doing, whether that is how they're answering the question, whether that is what their grouping is, we can offer choice that still allows them to think critically, evaluate their needs, and yet we can control the outcome and not just make it this open-ended, sit by who you want to work with, or decide what part you want to do. Like, we can offer them choices but control it, so we're still having them do the critical thinking, they're still carrying the cognitive load, but we're controlling that outcome so that we know it's not just going to go off the rails. Another aspect of this is reflection.
So, y'all probably use reflection a lot. You may use reflection in your class now. Like, I know when I taught freshman English, they journaled pretty regularly. They hated it, but they still did it. When you're writing a paper, when you have your students writing a paper, you'll probably have them peer review or peer edit it. That's part of project-based learning, is taking time during the project. And this could be, again, like going back to what Jen and I talked about, like one of the milestones to make sure your kids are working could be like, y'all need to bring in a rough draft and y'all are going to switch with other students and reflect and edit each other's business plan. The point of, like, the definition of reflection is students and teachers reflect on the effectiveness of their inquiry and project activities, the quality of student work, and any obstacles that have arisen and how to overcome them. A big part of project-based learning, and it kind of feeds into giving your students a voice, is having them help you improve and create projects for your class. They're the best ones to tell you like what part of your project worked and what didn't, because they're the ones doing it. And there have been times, like even with what I was doing first quarter, where I'd have students doing things and they would come to me and be like, hey, Mr. Sisk, look, I ran into this problem, like what do I do? And I was like, okay, well then let's change it. You've got to be kind of flexible with it. And it gives them a little bit of ownership. It makes them feel like their voice matters. It makes them feel like they have a hand in their education. Like if we want our students to really like own their education, we have to give them the opportunities to do that. And reflection is part of that. It doesn't have to be a big thing, a big step. It can be part of a class period. It can be, the first 10, 15, 20 minutes of a class period. But it's super important because it checks on their progress and it gives them the feeling that their voice matters, that they're an important part of the creation and running of whatever project you're doing. All right.
Mr. B, I'm going to pick on you just because you're front and center. Do you mind reading the definition for critique and revise?
Critique and revision. Students give, receive, and use feedback to improve their process and product.
Thank you so much. I want to be totally honest with you guys. I am terrible at this. I really am. Like, this is a huge deficit of mine. I will front load information with my students. I'll give them a way to discuss and engage. I'll give them something to do, whether it's an assessment or a classwork TDQ that they're doing, whatever. And then I have them turn it in. I say, great. And then I give it a grade. I put it into Power School. And the downside of that is I'm cutting out a huge critical thinking portion that our students actually can do. If anybody is familiar with adolescent development or teaching, you might be familiar with something called Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is just this idea of progressive things that happen as you grow as a critical thinker. And so base level would be just repeating what you heard. After that, it would be formulating your own response. And it goes progressively. One of the higher levels of Bloom's is that somebody can evaluate and then express why it does or does not meet a standard. And the reality is, I cut this away from my students so much on a regular basis when this is something that can be so helpful for them. And in project-based learning, this is especially the case. Instead of having our students work on something, they turn it in, we say, okay, I'll give you a grade, including a portion before they turned it in, where we say, I want you to present your project, and I'm gonna have each group ask you, or it could be ask a question, it could be each group gives one thing that worked, one thing they feel like didn't work. It could be bring in an expert, your group presents to them, the expert gives feedback. Either way, getting our kids in the step where they can look at something they've done and say, let me ask myself if this actually meets what we're shooting for, if it meets that driving question, or if I'm falling short. Instead of just turning it into me, and then they get a grade, and then they go, Mr. Gross, wait, why did I get a C on this? I feel like I worked really hard. And I go, yeah, it looks really great, but you didn't answer this at all. Making sure that we're giving our students the opportunity to actually work through that is a huge step in taking ownership of their work, being critical thinkers, even just being better evaluators of themselves. After you've got this critique and revision, there's a spot that we're all familiar with, the public product.
So, like I said, when I started looking at PBL, the place I started was here, was the last step with the public product. I was like, what do I want to do? I have to have a bunch of bells and whistles and something great at the end of the semester and like, that's the last step. So, again, that's why I scrapped the whole thing. I was wrong. The project asks students to demonstrate what they learn by creating a product, artifact, presentation, performance, and or event that is shared with people beyond the classroom. A couple of examples we saw, they had an example of a teacher in an engineering class who had the students design airplane wings. This was at a school in Queens, and then they brought in aeronautical engineers to look at their airplane wings and test them and help them, like they brought them in twice, once during the revision process to help them test them then and revise them, and then they presented them at the end and they saw like which wing could bend the most, flex the most, which could hold the most weight. It was just, the kids all loved it because they were putting weight on the wing until it broke, and so it was like a big fun thing for them to do. We saw another school that was testing, was looking at lead contamination in water, and their final project was they presented to a bunch of graduate level chemists, or excuse me, PhD chemists, people getting their PhD in chemistry about lead contamination and the chemicals that coat pipes to keep that from happening. So it can be as simple as them presenting to somebody else, but the point of it is to have them make something that they can show somebody else, and have them, like, all too often, you know what happens when your kids get work back. Like, you have them create something, and what do? They shove it into the bottom of their backpack, or into the back of their locker, or they just leave it in your room. The work just kind of stops there. The point of this step is to keep the work continuing and going on. So, the two big takeaways we had is the driving question. That's at the heart of it. If y'all, like, if we want to do this, if y'all have an idea about it, like, the question is where you start. What question are you trying to answer? The other one was at the center of the project learning is not the project itself. It's not that final product. Andy and I know that, I mean, we've been up here for 25 minutes, and so we know that this has been quick. It's a lot of information. We'll be hopefully coming back up here. I don't know. I haven't checked with Jenny or Braxton, so we'll see. But in going more in depth on this, if you have questions, feel free to ask us. Like, that's what this is. If you want to try something in your class, feel free to ask us. Like, this is not something that has to take over your class. Like, we're not turning into Crosstown. We're not going to be a full PBL school ever. This is something that can come in alongside lecturing, alongside what you already do, to help, you know, your students learn in a different way. Don't be afraid to, like, ask us questions. If we don't have the answer, which is could very well happen, like, we will help find it. We'll help y'all however we can. Yep, we'll go ahead and let everybody go. We're all busy. We all have stuff to do this morning. So,
Just hang on before we let you go. Tyson's in the room today for a very specific reason, and of course Ryan too. But we've just been to Atlanta for the last 3 days. Ryan, Ben, me, Tyson, and just learning all about independent schools, where they're going, what are the trends, what are we looking for. And the interesting thing was, you know, we don't want to jump on these fads. We don't want to jump on all kinds of things and just do for the sake of it. If we're looking at the content dumping and perceived as content dumping. They want to see that we are handing some of the reins over to our students. It's more critical thinking, and they are the ones that are now taking ownership of their education. So even little things like the website, the students are doing the doing, and the teacher's more like the sage on the side, looking, helping, guiding. So you're not handing over the reins completely, and that's kind of where we should be heading. Not that we are constantly just always giving. That there's something coming back from them, and it was interesting to note. So Tyson, as I say, is here because we want to start, from our little 2-year-olds all the way up. We want to speak the same language. We want to have the same story. And these two gentlemen, if you're in middle school, this is where you go. If you're in upper school, this is where you go. Just for ideas. They're both going to go down to lower school, and then of course Ashley and Pam are also going to go to some conferences on this. And again, we're not turning into a project-based learning school. We don't want to be a project-based learning school, but we do want to start this critical thinking and getting our students to take a little bit of ownership. Yes.
I think a lot of us have done projects before and we found some that haven't worked. It'd be good to share because I learn a lot from others.
Yeah.
Mr. Brink does them in Bible, we do them in science, I know foreign language. It'd be good to hear from others because a lot of us, we've seen some that didn't work, we asked the wrong question or whatever, it was busy work. We've done some that worked. It'd be good just from this August faculty to hear what has worked, what projects haven't worked. We missed the question, we missed the vote, whatever.
That's a great idea. So next.
Jenny, can I jump on that? I
Absolutely.
really appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Reed. One thing that we got in contact with some people who are teachers in Delaware and in Virginia. We talked about having a Google folder where everybody can throw ideas up from their schools, ones that they have. And so if that's okay, I'd love if there's a way we can make that accessible to the staff here so that you can, like you said, throw ideas, ones that worked, ones that didn't, but also we have people from other schools who are saying, hey, we tried this,